Hi everyone, this is United Against Suicide, Sheffield United Football Club Community Foundation. This is the first of a four series of looking at suicide prevention. Today we're looking at signs and symptoms of people that may be suicidal. The second session will be how you support somebody who may be high risk feeling suicidal. The third is how we support family and friends who've lost a loved one through suicide. And then the final session will be, what do you do if you feel suicidal? So they are just the four sessions that I'll be leading. My name is Delroy Hall, one of the trustees of the Community Foundation, but also a trained counsellor with over 3 decades experience, teacher, trainer, and so forth. So these are just some of the sessions we'll be doing over the next few weeks. I'd like to say right from the outset, though, that if you've had a bereavement in the last 2 or 3 years, this session may not be the best sessions. But if you want to watch it, by all means do that. But if it gets too much, of course, pause the video and then just take some time out. I do know a family who lost a brother, son to suicide 5 years ago. They did watch a whole series that I did on suicide prevention. They found it really, really helpful, but it was very, very difficult, as you can imagine. So that's just to let you know the ins and outs. There's some information signposts where you can go for mental health support and suicide prevention. Also, this is a recording. On Wednesday, I did the live, but actually after it was done, it was pointed out that the microphone wasn't set up properly. But anyway, this is a recording, and hopefully this will be far better than what happened on Wednesday. Coming Wednesday, the 23rd of November at 7 o'clock, I'll make sure that everything is sorted. The other thing I'd like to say as well, that it's still in our language. We use the word somebody commits suicide. Suicide was decriminalised in 1961, so it is relatively new, but the idea of committing suicide is still retained in our language. So historically, for many, many years, when the church and state got together, they really did have a very dim view of people who took their own lives. And in fact, what happened, if the person was successful in suicide or successful in taking their own lives, the families would be brought to court and property would be confiscated. Real difficult situation that the family went through if somebody was successful. So the proper term now is either somebody's completed suicide. I've even heard people say somebody's killed themselves. If somebody has survived, we use the terms they've survived a suicide attempt. So the whole thing around commit, it harks back to the day when suicide was seen as a crime, and if you had failed attempt at suicide, you would be brought to court, you'd be tried and imprisoned. That doesn't happen now, thank goodness. But just to kind of let us know a little bit of history about the kind of history of suicide. So some of the signs and symptoms. People can be quite explicit. They want to talk about hurting or threatening to kill themselves. And that's kind of some of the signs and symptoms. We won't be looking too much at the causes today, but just some of the signs and symptoms to kind of watch out for if somebody might be contemplating taking their own lives. You have some people who write and talk about death quite a lot. If it's something that they haven't done normally, but you then begin to hear them talking about death quite a lot. Very different for older people. I know many older people who are in their maybe late 80s, 90s, and they say, certainly in my culture, Caribbean culture, that they're ready to go home. Means they don't want to go back to the Caribbean, but actually they've lived a life, being faithful, as Christians, and now they want to go and be with their Creator. So when they say things like, I'm ready to go home, it's not that they want to take their own lives, but they're kind of ready to kind of leave this world. Whereas if a younger person or somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who don't normally talk about it, has started to talk about death and so forth, it's something to kind of just be take note in terms of what is taking place in their own lives. Maybe individuals might start looking at ways of taking their own lives, and they might even enter into a conversation with you. You might even see some people start stockpiling pills. That's what some people do. They get a whole load of pills. I remember a friend of mine. He stockpiled a whole pills, wrote letters, and I remembered he well, obviously he survived it. He took a load of tablets and he drank. He drank a lot, and he wrote all the letters, and he went to bed, and then he woke up some time later on, and he realized, he said, whoever's out there, you really don't want me to go, do you? And as far as I know, he's still alive to this day. So people can be stockpiling pills and looking for ways, researching for ways to take their own lives. So it's something to kind of be noted of. Some people, I know one individual, you can imagine over 30 years of being involved in the counselling world and so forth, you would hear stories. So one of the signs might be, somebody might actually ask you your opinion about suicide. Again, something that's come straight out of the blue. And if you disagree with them, or you have a different view, if they get quite angry, it could be that something that they're thinking about. So that can be a sign as well if they start to ask you about your opinion, and certainly if you're against it, and they are kind of thinking about doing it, there could be some anger that's there, and you kind of know that they may be seriously considering taking their own lives. Things like, I wish I hadn't been born, I wish I wasn't here. And one of the things to watch out for is people say, my family would be a lot better off without me. That often is something that's said from individuals who perhaps going through a really tough time, can't see an end, and the family's impacted on certain things, and they may say things like, you know, my family would be far better without me. That's something to kind of really look out for. I think the other thing as well, that even though somebody may not talk about suicide, but in the conversation, if you get the sense that people feel totally exasperated, no sense of hope, that is a sure sign that they're well, I'd say it's a possible sign that they're contemplating taking their own lives. I think there's a saying that says we can go 40 days without food, 4 days without water, 4 minutes without air, but 4 seconds without hope. Hope is incredibly important in terms of our lives. And one of the things I should have said at the beginning, it'd be really good if you've got pen and paper. He says this 7 minutes into the talk, pen and paper to take notes. Obviously, you can come back and watch it again. But 3 questions that's really important to ask is, why must I use this? How must I use this? When will I use this? So the information is really important to kind of consider how we're going to use the information that we're kind of hearing, and how we can be informed. So if there is somebody we know, or somebody who we may meet in passing, you know, the amount of people I've spoke to in passing, and they share so much. They don't know I'm a counsellor, but they just kind of share so much. But you could be in a position whereby somebody just talks to you, and you might then kind of pick up some signs. And next week I'll be looking at what you do if somebody does display the signs of wanting to take their own life. Feelings of self-loathing, self-hatred, they're real kind of an extreme form of self-deprecation, that they are really kind of down on themselves. This is not about just a bad day or a bad moment, but they really, the views about themselves are incredibly crushing and negative, and even in the conversation it seems as though there's no hope, there's no future. Really important. 2 things that really push people that way is guilt and shame. And guilt is feelings of deserving blame for sometimes imagined offences. So sometimes, many of us have been in conversations whereby you may have said something and it's played on your mind a little bit. You feel really bad. You go back to the person, you know, and you say to them, you know what I said a couple of days ago, I've been thinking about it, I was wrong, you know. And they'll say, no, it was fine, I didn't think anything of it. And you're kind of relieved, but during that time, you're feeling guilty. Shame is worse. Shame is crushing and defeating. So shame is a mixture of feelings of, a mixture of regret and self-hate and dishonor. So shame, and you know that in some cultures that shame is absolutely awful. We won't get into it now, but I suspect, the little that I know, that if people feel a real sense of shame about who they are, not only is it an emotional thing, but it's psychological. I would suspect it affects their physiological being, it affects their immune system, it affects how their body functions, the endocrine system. So shame is incredibly crushing, and if people can't seem to find a way to release themselves or move beyond that shame, and they see no hope, that's a sure sign that one of the things they may consider, certainly if it's not taking their own lives, but certainly self-harm and so forth. One of the things that we can notice as well, that some people kind of getting their affairs in order. So by that I mean they make a will, and some people, what they do in terms of once they've made up their mind, they start to give away valuable memorabilia, things that have been really important to them. And I know of one guy, I was at his funeral, and people were saying that before he passed, he contacted individuals and gave them sums of money. So his estate, his money that he built up as a businessman, he was giving people bits of money and not declaring to anybody what he was going to do, but he'd already intended to take his own life. And sometimes you have some people, unexpected calls, unexpected visits, and sometimes you think to yourself, why is this person saying this, thanking me for all that I've done and so forth? What the person could be doing, could be, because we don't know, could be that the person has actually decided to take their own life, but they want to go around and see some significant individuals and just to kind of say their farewells without saying farewell. I recall working with somebody many years ago, a young man who looked after, basically fathered his younger brother, kind of looked after him and so forth, and his younger brother took his own life. He says kind of a mystery, but the day before his brother took his own life, he met up with him and he said, you know, I just wanted to thank you for so and so and all the rest of it, and for looking after me and so forth. And the following day heard the news that he'd taken his own life. And I remember working with him, and this young man was full of remorse and guilt. He wasn't there for his brother and so forth. And we then relived what happened the day before. And I said to him, do you realize what your brother was saying? He said to me, no. I said, your brother, he didn't say this to you, but he'd made his mind up. And he was thanking you for all that you did. And he said, having that insight and realization really helped him to relax and no more felt remorseful or guilt that his brother had actually decided to take his own life, but he was actually saying thank you. So sometimes people can be putting their affairs in order, and there's a load of ways in which they can do that. And another way, of course, that people withdraw from social groups. So somebody who was once not necessarily the life and soul of the party, but there's party going on or events, they'd be there, they'd be involved, they'd be quite a kind of social animal, but you notice over a period of time they've kind of slowly withdraw, almost as though withdrawing into the background, hoping that nobody notices them and they can kind of die in peace. So that's something to watch out for. For some people, excessive behaviors, excessive intake of alcohol. Some people have just loads of unsafe sex. They live in a way, their life is risky. So another example, that some people will go in their cars and they will have long, fast drives. That's come up many times in counselling, and I will say, look, it's almost as though you want to kill yourself, or you want something to happen so that you die. And more often than not, they say, yes, that's what I wanted to happen. So excessive behaviours, alcohol, drugs, people just going around sleeping with any and everybody, something that they wouldn't normally do, that can be a sign of, you know what, this is the end of the road for me. So before I'm going to go the way I'm going to do it. So those things are really important. The other thing I think I would really say that is sometimes when people have made up their minds to take their own life, there's almost a sense of calm. The calmness is, I'm at peace with what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. And you can notice something if they've been through a really difficult time, and all of a sudden there's a sense of peace or calm, which, if you're not careful, if you're not listening very well, you think, oh, Delroy's all right now. He's on the road to recovery. He's kind of turned the corner, but it's come so quickly without any kind of intervention. But there's a sense of calmness, and if you're not careful, you miss it because you think everything's okay. But actually, what they may have done quite often is come to a conclusion. I'm going to take my own life, and I'm now at peace with what I'm going to do. So that's something to be mindful of. So there's a whole range of things that can happen to individuals in terms of signs and symptoms, relationship breakup, divorce. I certainly remember working with a student quite a few years ago who said to me, one of the sessions, Delroy, said, I shouldn't be here. So I said, what do you mean? And so he told me of his parents split up when he was 15, just about to do his exams. And he said he was traumatized by the breakup. It was a very bad breakup. So he just dumbed down his emotions, just sat on them, got through his exams, did his A-levels, sat on the emotions, and things got so bad that he decided to take his own life. But he said, I remembered I had a doctor's appointment. And he went to the doctor, and I don't know what happened in the session, but the doctor picked up on something and immediately made the referral, and he got the help that he needed because he was going to go back home to take his own life. So she spotted something, and I don't remember the doctor's name now, but I said to him, if I ever met that doctor, I would have hugged her because she saw something about this young guy. And she was able to ask the question, which then prevented him from taking his own life, and he ended up coming to university, getting the extra support he needed, and it worked really well. The other thing that we need to watch out for, men in particular, successfully in their job, and then we hear the term quite often, don't we? I've been made redundant. No, your post or your job has been made redundant. You haven't. You may have lost your job, but you haven't been made redundant. And for some men in particular, where there's status, they're the breadwinner, there's kudos, there's a level of importance in the workplace, and they lose their job. For some men, and certainly if they haven't got a backup plan or they're not resourceful, they crush into a deep level of despair and then can't function. They were once a breadwinner, they're now dependent on their wife and handouts and so forth. And some men can't deal with that. I'm not Freudian, but one of the things that Freud said was this: unexpressed emotions never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. Unexpressed emotions never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. So this whole thing about talking is incredibly important in terms of how we live our lives, and men in particular, but I understand it is getting better. Men are beginning to seek counselling, the support that they need before things get too bad. Job-related stress can cause people to get to the place whereby they can't take it anymore, so I may as well end it all. Entrenched financial difficulties or gambling addiction, that can lead people to take their own life. Again, this whole thing around shame. They might have a very good facade, they're very successful and so forth, but they have some hidden secrets that they wouldn't want to know, they wouldn't want anybody to know. So those things can push people to the edge where they contemplate taking their own lives. Depression, isolation and loneliness, people withdrawing, as I said before, life-threatening illnesses, terminal illness. People can't bear the thought of being a burden to other people, so they kind of want to end it all. People who have chronic pain, the pain is unbearable, it can't be managed with drugs and so forth. And every day, day in, day out, every minute, every second, every hour, there's just this excruciating pain that they're not able to separate themselves from. And one of the ways that they can end the pain is to take their own lives. As I said before, people can be researching ways how to die and so forth. Or some people, there's a fascination with suicide. And certainly as of late, the last few months, we've heard about this young girl who took her own life, and the judge's conclusion was that some of the websites and some of the stuff on social media was conducive to her taking her own life. So fascination with suicide and so forth. And also we know about cyberbullying and so forth. And the final thing I'd just like to talk about in terms of some communities and cultures. I remember being raised in Leicester in the 70s and 80s, and I'm not saying it was common, but it wasn't unheard of people of certain cultures, if they'd failed their examinations, they took their own lives. Because this whole thing around examination and success and academic success, part of the culture, and to not seem to have failed was seen as a sign of shame. As you know, in some cultures as well, the whole thing around being gay and sexual orientation, and single people who are struggling with their sexual identity can't find anybody in their community who they can talk to, or they don't feel they can talk to anybody, and the way out, of course, is for them to take their own lives. They will view that the community will have abandoned them, God will have abandoned them, so the way out is to kind of take their own life. And some of us will know that in some, not many, but few aspects of some religions, that suicide is honourable. It's a way out, but it's actually honourable to take their own lives. So these are just a few signs and symptoms. Next week we'll be looking at this whole thing around how do you support a friend who may be feeling suicidal. What can you do? And actually, you may not be a counsellor, mental health practitioner, psychologist, psychotherapist, but don't underestimate what you can do to support somebody who may be feeling suicidal, and you go to the places where they can get the help and be with them when they go and get the support that's needed. So my name is Delroy Hall. I'm talking on behalf of Sheffield United Football Club Foundation community, looking at United Against Suicide. I'll finish with this. The National Institute of Mental Health says this: suicide is complicated and tragic, but I would say suicide is complex, complicated and tragic, but it is often preventable. So suicide is complicated, complex and tragic, but it is often preventable. I will end on that note. I wish you well, and I'll see you next Wednesday, the 23rd at 7 o'clock live on Facebook. Wish you all the best. Take care. Bye now.